A word from our sponsors. What do the world's largest demand-side platforms have in common? They're effective, but they require large annual contracts and spend minimums. With AdLib, growing agencies get a single platform that connects to every top global DSP with no contracts, no spend minimums, and G2's #1 ranked support. That means access to the entire universe of TV, digital out-of-home, audio, display, video, and native without a hassle and with no blind spots. It's incredibly easy to use. Plus, it can automate most of the work your team spends hours a day doing manually. Get the most powerful media buying technology without the barriers to entry. Check out AdLib at getadlib.com. Again, that's GETADLIB.com. Welcome to the AdTechGod Pod, your window into the world of advertising technology and the people behind it. I'm your host, AdTechGod. Welcome to today's episode of the AdTechGod Pod, where we connect with some of the top sales and business executives in our industry. I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Laura Morrison, who leads supply partnerships at Amagi. She has a broad range of expertise in strategy, negotiation, deal execution, and more. She truly honed her skills through various roles at well-known companies like Engage BDR, Ad.net, and 47 Samurai. We've been talking about having her on the podcast for some time now, so I'm thrilled to finally dive into her story and get to know her. Laura, welcome to the AdTechGod Pod.
Great to be here.
Super happy to have you here. Thanks for accepting, by the way.
Of course.
I love that you did so.
This is a privilege to be here.
Been a couple months in the works.
Yes.
Laura, I start all the podcasts the same way. I really like to just understand, your background, how you got to Amagi and to the role that you're in today, and just really kind of get to know the people that I'm chatting with.
My background is pretty diverse and broad throughout the ad tech ecosystem. I got my start working for a small agency that had its own little ad network. This was maybe back in 2008 or 9 when ad network wasn't really a word yet, but this agency had their own direct sales team and they had a niche group of publishers, web publishers, whose display ad inventory they managed completely. The CEO hired me on originally to head up their creative department and also to head up the ad ops, to be their head of ad ops. I didn't know what ad ops was. I knew what a server was. I knew how to make little websites, so I understood the concept. The CEO said, that background is just fine. I'll teach you everything you need to know. And boy, did he. It was a fantastic education. He really would get into the nitty gritty with me. And I found that I really enjoyed the logic and the technical part of it and understanding how things work, understanding how the ad ops process works. So I got more and more curious about it and started reading blogs to try to understand how I could get better at things. And I did. I ended up becoming pretty proficient at trafficking campaigns onto this handful of websites and making sure that they delivered on time. It was all very basic back then, banner ads and maybe some text ads. But that was the foundation and that was the start of my career in ad tech. And it really is what sparked this interest in me. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And after this position, I knew what I wanted to do. That man's name is Jess Dolgan, by the way. He's incredible. From there, I went to Engage BDR, where I was again in ad ops, and I learned how to work on a different model, right? We would lots of times buy on a CPM, but try to back out into our advertiser's CPA goal and still make a margin. So that was a new concept for me, but I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed making things work and looking at what was converting, what wasn't, how to optimize those campaigns. It was all just really, really appealing to me. From there, I went over to Ad.net, and it's an interesting story. A friend of mine who I'd known for a while, we'd done some charity work together, and we were again at a charity event. And he and I were just sitting on the floor around an old Epson printer, like folding pamphlets. And he just asked what I've been up to lately. And he said, I want you to come work for me. He was the CEO of a company once upon a time called Findology, and it was a search marketing company. He'd sold that company. He said, I'm starting a new venture. I'm calling it ad.net. I want to hire you for talent. I don't know what I'm going to do with you yet, but you're going to come work for me maybe middle of next year. And like literally on July 15th of that next year, I think that's like right in the middle of next year, he reached out and said, when can you start? And when I got to ad.net, there were only 12 of us there. I didn't know anything about search marketing or any other types of advertising for that matter. I had only really done display. I learned immediately about all different kinds of ad formats, domain redirects. Pop unders were really popular back then. We're talking 2012. Intent based marketing, email marketing. I got to have a little sampling of each of those different channels, types of channels. That's what ad.net does best is intent based marketing. I ended up selling on this little side project that it was, they gave me a celebrity website that ad.net had created. And they said, hey, you have a background in display. You think you can make this make money? You can buy traffic to it on our ad.net traffic network. And I said, great. So I was really able to pull together an ad server and I was able to traffic all the ads. So I got really good at that. I ended up sticking with that project for a couple of years. I grew that one site out to 9 different sites in different verticals. I hired on some editorial staff. We brought in more tech behind it. It was a really great experience and really just gave me a background in actually implementing on the publisher side, being a publisher. When that business kind of started dying down, it was definitely one of the made for advertising sites, and industry tends to trend away from that at some point in any kind of medium. I stayed on at ad.net doing business development.
How was that? How was that transition from doing kind of an ad ops type of role into business development? Did you feel that maybe that was what you were meant to do? Because that's what you're doing today, right?
Yeah. And I'd had those SSP relationships on the demand side, that I could bring with me to even, bolster our demand base. Ad.net at that point had started its own display and video ad network division, and that was headed up by Brad White. I watched him build it from the ground up with a corded phone and a desktop Dell computer, and that was it. So while I was working on the content sites division, Brad was busy building up this display and video division. So a lot of our business would overlap. So we worked together a lot, and so it was a good transition for me. I started working under him, just doing basically biz dev, publisher development, and I was really good at that. It was a good fit for me. And I think bringing my ops background into it really informed the types of publishers that I would reach out to and bring on. It would help me make suggestions for optimizations. It was just a tool in my tool belt that I really value and I still lean back on to this day. Brad ended up departing the company and I stayed in the publisher development role, but I also started doing publisher development for our company's core business focus, which was search or intent based ads. So I got a little bit more experience there.
What do you feel like your background from ad ops to business development, and then obviously you understanding the nitty gritty of it all, and like understanding campaign trafficking and backing out into to ROI for buying on a CPM and backing out to some sort of performance metric. How do you think that's really helped you in what you're doing today at Amagi? And does that help you have better conversations with publishers today, even in the streaming fast world that you're in now at Amagi?
At Amagi is streaming and fast focused. So the ads that I'm dealing with now are CTV potted video ads, and video is generally considered more top of funnel. So my ops background really comes in handy, but maybe the CPA stuff, the performance stuff doesn't really factor into it so much, but it's always just really good to have in the back of my head that understanding that advertisers they're all looking for some kind of metric, KPI, whether it's eyeballs or an actual conversion, a purchase or a sign up, because everybody's in it to make money. You have to keep that in the back of your head. things start to make a lot of sense when you still go back to that idea.
And there's so many like different metrics in connected TV now. Like, yeah, it is definitely kind of top of funnel right now. Obviously, there's some performance metrics and performance CTV, I guess, offerings in market today. Still sort of top of funnel for the most part, with the exception of a few that are focusing on the bottom of the funnel now, with lots of like great integrations with these companies are doing to help convert users. I'm curious, like, what do you feel is really like one of the biggest challenges for you as you sit and like you wear your business development partnerships hat? Where do you find most of your challenges come from? And this doesn't have to be about Amagi. It doesn't have to be about Engage PDR, but just generally, how are you feeling? What are some of those challenges that you face having to do these partnerships and understand whether or not it's the lemon is worth the squeeze? Like, you might work on something and it not pan out to what you think it is.
That happens often. Everybody wants to make something work, but it just ends up not being commercial or scalable, which is often frustrating because the idea behind it is good. In terms of like the big challenges I face, and I've seen this throughout my career, is whenever there's a new medium that pops up. Right now it's CTV, but before, mobile was before it, and then the web blogs before that, was the consolidation of supply and demand. And if you don't own the supply, if you're not the publisher and you're not the advertiser, you don't own the demand. I used to say, or if you don't own some sort of tech, you're going to get squeezed out of the equation pretty quickly. It's just going to happen over and over again. With web, ads.txt, just it tanked tons of ad networks almost overnight. We don't really have a crystal ball into the future, but this has happened over and over again in the past. So I tend to believe that if I see the same patterns over and over again, it's going to be a pattern. So what's the challenge now is I'm seeing a lot of that consolidation too. I think it's a good thing, but again, if you don't own the supply and you don't own the demand, you're going to get squeezed out. And there are a lot of really great, innovative companies out there who are providing value, who are adding value, whether it be an incremental ad unit or some kind of data product. It's going to get tough to have to re-navigate the new landscape. And another challenge I see is, especially that's specific to CTV, is the platforms and the OEMs are the new publishers. You have to own the screen. Back in the web days and even mobile, the app owner or the website owner was the publisher. Now the publisher at CTV, it's Samsung, it's Vizio, or it's a Pluto TV, and I think that they've all positioned themselves really well to bring on all their own demand and to bring all their data in-house. I would do the same thing if I were them. But for, other tech providers and kind of middlemen who provide lots of value it's going to be harder and harder for those types of companies to make money.
Yeah, and you mentioned like the cycle that we see. I remember working in mobile app, and it was, we have a mobile app, but there's no demand. Okay, great. Now the demand is here. And now we're scaling it. And then you see this massive flood of inventory coming in, and then everything gets cleaned out. It's kind of like, okay, you start to see what is a good performing app, what is a legitimate app, which one has the right type of content for our advertisers. You start to kind of see the cleanup. On the CTV space, like, we've had a huge flood of new channels across the board. And I think people are finding it challenging. I think even the big broadcasters are finding that, like, yes, we can get the content, which is great. We have unique content and exclusive content, but getting those eyeballs is not as easy as everybody thinks. And we're seeing a lot of the big players kind of struggle a little bit with growing usage, but also, do we keep it free? Do we charge a subscription model plus, ad supported? I think we're figuring it out, but the consolidation's definitely happened. Like, all the major channels are now owned by 3 or 4 big companies.
Yeah. This industry as a whole, it's the Wild West, right? There aren't laws until there are. And so when a platform or an OEM makes their content, the ad inventory, their own, like, that's the new law. And that's great for them. But Definitely, there are so many new channels. It gets overwhelming for the user. I think a lot of those big platforms are also experimenting with just content optimization, right? You want to promote channels that produce the most engagement over channels that really don't. And back in the day when CTV first started, those big platforms would take any channel, any content, and now they're increasingly difficult to get your content on those platforms because there just is so much. And that's good for them because they're working off their data. Whatever's producing more viewing hours is what they're going to hold on to because it's going to make more money. But it's also a better experience for the viewer, for the user, right? It's content that users want to see over content that they're maybe not.
Yeah, I think like content suggestion is really big. A few companies do it really well, like, based on what you've watched, based on what you like and you don't like, because it's important to them. Because I guess maybe unlike the linear space, you don't really leave the cable box. You're always in the cable box. But with streaming, you're jumping from app to app. And so when you jump from, Netflix to Hulu to Tubi, you've lost that user. So you want to keep them in your app as long as possible. So that content suggestion is super important for keeping the eyeballs there and honestly, advertiser dollars there. You need to have them watching multiple shows back to back.
Those single IP channels, I've noticed, tend to produce a lot of engagement. The channel devoted that's Baywatch 24/7, those channels tend to crush it, which is really interesting and pretty amusing because we're all into binge watching, especially since the pandemic. But it's great to see those kind of classic shows that were really great. See a new heyday.
I can't believe there's a Baywatch channel.
It's so great. It's huge in the US, but also abroad, especially Germany.
It's David Hasselhoff.
Absolutely.
It's incredible because, like, you moved into kind of the streaming world or the fast world, like a lot of us did. Like, all of us kind of fell into it. We were working in mobile or display or web or video, and then the CTV thing popped up, and we all jumped on board, right? So, like, nobody really has much more experience in the space than the people in it now. It's if you've been working in it 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you've been working in it since its inception.
100%. Being able to be there for the sort of birth of the CTV boom, I was very fortunate to be there in the beginning. But I really have to do a shout out to Brad White from my old colleague at ad.net, who left ad.net to pursue his own thing, and his own thing became CTV. He made it his mission to learn every single thing about CTV, how it works, and the ads component. He started the company called 47 Samurai, and he brought on Adam Clayton, who was a former ad.net colleague as well, for a couple of years. And when the business grew enough, he brought me on. That was my 47 Samurai experience. And Brad gave me he taught me everything I know about CTV right now. And he had been building ad stacks for publishers, big and small platforms. He knew who the worlds were, the Amagis were. He understood how it all fit together. He had brought in all these wonderful SSP and DSP relationships that were holdovers from our ad.net days, but for CTV. It was the very beginning of the CTV era. A lot of these big content companies did not know how to get their content onto connected TV, whether it be an O&O app or a fast platform, a streaming platform like a Pluto or a Tubi or a Samsung TV Plus. And we would advise these content companies on how to get their content up. And we would come in as their monetization partner. So we were really able to get in there from the beginning and just watch the evolution and adapt to it. And it's, you really have to stay on point on all the trends. And I really credit Brad with staying up on all the trends, all the headwinds, what's coming down the pipe, what changes do we need to make. It was just an incredible experience. And I don't think I would be where I am today without my experience with 47 Samurai.
Good. I mean, I can tell. I can tell that there's like a long-standing like relationship and friendship and like gratefulness for the people that taught you what you know, right? Like, I think that's such a huge part of this industry is, you kind of grow and mature with each other and you learn together. Nobody really knows much more than the other person. We just learn from each other. I mean, yes, there's the Adam Heimlichs who are like super knowledgeable about algorithms. And like, Ari Paparo, who's like, okay, the guy built tech, like he understands tech a lot. But for most people, like myself, like I learned from my colleagues, I learned from my coworkers, from my bosses, from the people I interact with, like you today. And I think that's kind of what makes AdTech pretty cool, is that we're all learning together and growing together and adjusting to whatever changes are coming.
Yes. And you really have to kind of, we have to get over ourselves and not be afraid to raise our hand and ask the dumb question, because really chances are it's not a dumb question. And maybe 5 other people in the meeting are also wondering the same thing. It's just really sharing knowledge as much as you can. That comes back to you tenfold. And just being curious and seeking out those answers. What do they say in art school? You have to learn the rules before you can break them. So as much learning, never stop learning, because this is always evolving.
It's nonstop. It's weird. I've been doing this full time now as a podcast host, CMO for architecture, working with Ari and Jeremy, and I'm used to kind of being in it. And now I'm in it, but I'm not. I'm kind of on the peripheral. So I'm constantly like reading and talking to people. I'm like, okay, I got to stay up to date as much as possible. Don't get me wrong, I love what I'm doing today, but it moves fast. And now I feel like I have the bandwidth to keep up, if that makes sense. I think most people don't. They're at work 8 to 5, and you can't keep up with every trend that's whizzing by in some sort of news article. I can. That's kind of what I'm supposed to do. So it's definitely a blessing. There's a lot of people listening to this podcast now. I mean, what would you leave as like a final word to people who are listening to the podcast that work in the industry? Like, what would be a final thought that you'd want to say to them in regards to working in AdTech?
My final words would be continuing on with what we were just talking about. Never stop being curious. Always ask questions. Try to be as helpful as you can to your colleagues, to your clients. Become an authority or a resource for your clients to learn about industry trends and where things are headed. Be white glove. And if you don't know the answer to a question, that's okay. Nobody does. Nobody majored in this in college. Maybe they do now. I'm dating myself. But when I was little, I don't think I ever said I want to be an ad tech when I grew up. And just keep in mind that almost nobody did. So everybody's still learning. And also be open to listening to others. There are some great, knowledgeable people out there who have wonderful ideas and can teach you a lot if you let them.
I think listening is important. I went out to dinner with someone I respect a lot in the industry. I think by the time this podcast comes out, it would have been a month or so. And he was talking to me about the shifts that he's seeing in the industry and how transactions are going to change. He's just giving me all these insights, and he's one of like the original programmatic guys. You can probably guess who it is. And I was just staring at him. He's like, "What do you think?" And I'm like, "Man, you think I think the way you think? Like, I'm learning from you sitting here. Like, everything you're saying makes absolute sense to me, but I would have never seen that coming unless you just mentioned it to me." It's pretty incredible, like the insights you get from people who have either built the technology or have experienced the trends from a different view of the ecosystem. They have so much foresight into what's going to happen. It's really super helpful to talk to these people and to engage with them on LinkedIn or X or Threads and just ask them questions, because I've learned that 90% of them, 95% of them are super kind and willing to help. Like, they're willing to answer your question. They don't ignore you. It's actually quite the opposite. A lot of them will reach out and offer to explain things.
Yes. Go to those ad tech mixers and meetups, in your city, and make those connections and keep those connections on LinkedIn, and make everybody your mentor. Everybody's willing to share knowledge and to teach others what they know.
That's why we're doing the party in October in New York City. Also in January, we're having another one, but then in March, we're doing a conference. So we are moving more into conferences too, which we're planning out now. So it's the fun part, which is the ATG part. Then the architecture part is, how do we educate? How do we knowledge share? How do we network? In less of a loud music dance floor environment. That's my idea. I'm like, let's just go party, have some fun. And then, Ari and Jeremy are working along with me on what the conference would look like and how they can network and have like a nice group of a few hundred people talking about what we do in the industry and how can we fix it. and how can we make it better.
I hope I get an invite.
Planning it in March. So we haven't even booked the place yet. We just know the date, approximate date. So definitely, I would love to have you there, and obviously would love your insight.
I'll be there.
Awesome. Well, Laura, thank you so much for being here today. And that actually brings us to the end of the podcast. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the AdTechGod Pod, a podcast for the people, about the people that make AdTech great. Stay connected with me for more insights, trends, and interviews in the realm of AdTech. Don't miss out on our latest updates, so follow me on X, Instagram, and connect with me on LinkedIn. Don't forget, ATG Slack community has insights, networking opportunities, and jobs. Keep the conversation going and stay at the forefront of AdTech innovation.